All right. Good afternoon, everyone. For some, maybe good morning. For some, good evening. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar, which is the first webinar, by the way, within Equalture focused on recruitment agencies. So very excited that we changed the narrative a little bit from internal recruitment to external recruitment. What we are going to discuss today is DE&I strategies from an agency perspective. I brought two amazing guests with me today who are much more experienced in recruitment agencies than I am. So before we start off, Sacha, Gonçalo, thanks so much for joining today. Would you be able to give a quick introduction of who you are and what your company does? And before you do so, one practical note, before I forget to say that, there is a chat functionality for everyone who's joining in the lower right corner of your screen, and also a questions tab. So if you do have any questions for any of us throughout the webinar, please feel free to add them there, and we will try to answer them. And we are going to try to keep it between 30-40 minutes, something like that. Sorry, Sacha, go ahead, please.
Well, hi, everybody, and hi, Charlotte and Gonçalo. Thank you for the invitation. Let's start with that. My name is Sacha. I am one of the founders of Your Talent Agency, which is an agency that focuses on recruitment and relocation with a DE&I mission very much in our DNA. My career has always been primarily in recruitment, tech recruitment, and I would also say primarily on the agency side. Next to my day job, I also side hustle as a keynote speaker, a trainer, and a workshop host, which also always is around this topic between diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's me.
Okay, my turn now, I guess.
Yes.
Charlotte, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Gonçalo Sequeira. I'm from Portugal. I worked for 9 years in the recruitment scene. I started my career in a consulting company, but then moved for final clients. I worked for Fidzai, Mercedes, Adyen, Trengo, in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands. So I always went more on the final client side, but last August I started my own agency, hiire. Right now it's me and two other people doing a lot of recruitment and a lot of trainings. Basically, we are focused on helping companies to hire tech talents and also helping recruiters to become even better on what they do. So we also do a lot of trainings to recruiters. And D&I, it's of course an important topic nowadays that we try to embrace as an agency, even though that is not the first priority for us and for our clients. Is something that we need to have in top of minds, and we need to help to talk more about this. That's why I found this event quite interesting, because it's not every day that we have agencies talking about that. So I'm very curious to know how this conversation will go.
Thanks so much. And I completely forgot to introduce myself, and it's actually linked to the topic of this webinar today. So my name is Charlotte. I'm one of the founders of Equalture. We are an HR tech company based in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. What we basically do is we develop games measuring candidates, talents, behaviors, etc., that are being introduced at the very start of the hiring process, with the goal to make sure that your first impression of a candidate is purely based on science, without too much interference of gut feeling, biases. You look at a resume and you immediately have an opinion. And we do that for both internal recruitment, but also for recruitment agencies. And what is the nice link, or not nice, but interesting link to today's webinar? I actually had a recruitment agency myself for 2 or 3 years before I started this company. And I ran into the issue that we're actually going to discuss today. So I always we always tried with our agency to promote the candidates with a diverse background who might not have had the best resume or the opportunities that a lot of others already received somewhere along the way. And we just couldn't crack the code for some reason. We are talking about 5 years ago now. So I think D&I was also slightly different in terms of priority a couple of years ago. So we actually started Equalture because we couldn't manage to make that change in the time of having a recruitment agency. So I'm very curious to and keen to learn from your experiences there. Hey, before we move on to DE&I, because I think that DE&I is nowadays quite strongly linked to the talent shortage that we are also perceiving on the labor market. What do you guys see in today's labor market? Because it's an interesting one, right? There are a lot of different issues coming together at the same time, and I can imagine that as a recruitment agency, that is quite challenging.
Yeah, if it's okay, Gonçalo, if I answer
Good.
first. Yeah, the market is always changing, but I do agree that over the course of the last year and a half, and before that, of course, we had Corona, which was something that made people preferably just stay in their seat because the future looked very unclear. Then that got cleared up, and then we saw like a sort of a positive effect going in that people wanted to change jobs again. So all of a sudden there was this bomb explosion of talent. And now that I don't have to tell you guys that with the war happening, with a recession happening or around the corner, there's so many uncertainties happening around the world that people get anxious. And there's a lot of layoffs, especially in my domain, in the tech industry. There's massive layoffs going on, the bigger corporates, and that brings a different kind of anxiety. So it is definitely more difficult already from that side. And what we also see is that our clients, because as an agency you work for clients, clients are expecting more for basically the same that you were already doing. So, or they even want to pay less. So they are also anxious and more scared and making decisions. And for the amount that they're willing to spend on an external partner, they are expecting a lot more than a couple of years ago. So I think those are the biggest changes that we are experiencing.
Now, is that the same for you, Gonçalo?
Yeah, I agree with that part that clients are expecting way more, and we as an agency, we need to deliver a way more. But I think in terms of candidates, it's slightly easier because you have more people available in the markets, even though for certain positions where there wasn't happen layoffs, people are more scared to change jobs, like Sacha was saying, because people don't think twice, they think 3 times or 4 times before making a move. And I think that's really the challenge in the agency side, how we can make sure that that person is ready to make the move, that they are really motivated to make the move, because it doesn't matter to take someone from a good job to put them in a job that is not that good for them. And we really need to be a partner for the candidates to make sure they have the right motivation, they have the right skills to help our clients. And the clients also thinks twice or 3 times before making a hiring decision, and we need to help them towards the process and making sure they make the right move. So I think this is not more challenge or less challenging. I think last week a client asked me, so it's more difficult to hire now or not? And I told them that this is always difficult. Otherwise, people won't go to the agency to help them out, right? If they are looking for an agency, it's because they have a hard position to fill. It's not an easy position to fill. I would like to have easy positions to fill, but I don't. I only have hard positions to fill, but I like that. That's why people hire us. And I think that's why a final client or a company go to an agency and ask them for help.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, to zoom in on the topic of DE&I, because I just mentioned in my introduction, like tried this 5 years ago at the agency side and couldn't make it, but that was 5 years ago. I've seen some changes, maybe not enough, but at least some. You're in this industry, both of you, also for a longer period already. Have you experienced a change in mindset or efforts that companies are taking, and also therefore involving you in when it comes to DE&I?
Mm-hmm. Maybe can start with this one first, Sacha.
Yeah, sure, do it. Yeah.
So I think this is also location related because I worked for 8 years in Portugal and we didn't spoke much about diversity in our organization. I remember when I started at Mercedes, I was the second person to join, and when I looked to the workforce with 30 people, there was only guys that were married or with a girlfriend, and then I started to realize I have only the same people in the room. I need to do something to change this. And I started to realize that diversity and inclusion takes a place in the companies. But back in 2017 in Portugal, nobody spoke too much about this. And when I moved to Amsterdam in 2021, I started to hear much more about that. I started to see actions that companies were doing to change diversity in their workforce. And then I start to realize, okay, there is something here. There is a methodology that we can use. There is an effort that companies can do. So since 2021, at least for me, this topic is much more important than before. And I see that in the Netherlands, there is a lot of effort on it because there is a very international workforce. So we also are more open to that. There is an open mindset, and there is a need on that, because if we have people that are diverse, we need to make sure that we include them well, that we have a good onboarding, that we have all experience than if we compare it with a country that are more focused on their own people.
Oh, well.
Oh,
Oh boy.
no
That's what
worries.
happens when you're live.
Shall I continue maybe, or take over and hopefully Gonçalo will be back. Well, I think what he said is something that a lot of people ask me as well. Like, why is this such a big topic all of a sudden? It's always been a topic, but I think we've. Hey, Gonçalo, you're back. If it's okay with you, I just took over.
Sure.
I hope your connection is better. There was a big bang happening, of course, in the world a couple of years ago, which almost happened simultaneously. So we had a big Me Too movement, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement, and that is what really distinctively puts DE&I all of a sudden on the map of a lot of companies and put it in their strategic goals, because everybody was shook up, the world was shook up. And then people started noticing, like, we really have to take measures to show the outside world that we are at least trying and making an effort. And then diversity policies and action plans really became measurable. And believe me, we're not there yet. I think it's going way too slow. But that's, I think, where everybody saw that big change happening, and we put a mark on it, because now at least people understand a little bit what we're talking about when we're talking about D&I or DEI, and that's the starting point. But I think what companies are requesting, and that's something that we see happening, is really help on, okay, I know we have to and we want to, because it's not something that only goes with you have to. It's never the right motivation. It's something that needs to come from within the whole company, especially leadership. But once they feel that they want to move to a more inclusive workplace, they miss the tools and they miss the knowledge. And that is a request that I get. Well, if it's not daily, it's at least a couple of times a week, which is a good thing happening, because you can't change what you don't know.
No. Hey, and do you guys think that because this is always, it was always the struggle that I had when I had an agency still, is that, like, is it your responsibility as an agency to help defining the strategy or executing the strategy? And I think that a lot of companies just have no clue where to start. So the defining part, some sort of unconsciously becomes part of the job. But what is your view on the balance between responsibility of you as an agency, as an external partner, and the company?
Good question. Well, I believe it's about trust and partnership. So the closer you are with your clients and your partners, the bigger your trust will grow, and the more they will start seeing and believing and acting on your advices. That's what Gonçalo also said. That's the reason why they want to work with an agency, is because you know better, you have a bigger talent pool in domains that they don't know where to tap into. So if you are, I don't want to say willing, but even if you can get in that comfort zone of having a really trustworthy relationship with your client, which is difficult, I know, but definitely not impossible. That you can call them and just explain like, oh my God, I found the perfect candidate. Nothing has to do with what they look like on CV or what they look like in physique, but just based on how well your relationship is with your client and how well you understand what's missing in their current team. And that for me goes more about competences and cultural fit than on, did you have the right education or did you have enough years of experience using a certain tooling? So I think you can get there, but it means you have to invest a lot in your relationship and building in that trust, and also feeling a little bit bold enough to give them the pushback, because from a traditional world, and that's also how I've been, I want to say, raised as an agency recruiter. The client says something and you just run, right? You run for whatever they want. That's how we used to do it 10, 12 years ago. Now, the client is basically asking you to be their business partner, and also they need that pushback, but based on the right valid arguments and experience. And then they are a lot of times very willing to listen to you and to try out different approaches and talk to different types of candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I think it also depends a bit on the stage of the client and how big is the company and what they already done, or if they didn't do anything so far. So I think, like Sacha was doing, creating the trust, it's very critical because otherwise they won't listen to us, and we can come up with a lot of ideas, but they won't work out because that trust is not there. But if the trust is there, and if they are a small organization, we can drive a lot of that strategy and we can help them a lot. If the trust is there and if the organization is bigger, maybe we just need to create some tools, give them some guidance, and we don't need to be so much pushing ideas because the company is already working towards diversity and towards inclusion, which I think is the most important thing right now.
Yeah, definitely. I see a lot of questions, by the way. I had all, well, actually, my colleague Kat prepared a lot of questions for me, but I think there's a lot of very interesting questions there. I do have one question before I will try to make sure that we can answer all of the questions that are in the chat. So what I've seen from my experience a couple of years ago, to give you some frame of reference, when I had a recruitment agency, it was purely focused on females. So we were the definition of positive discrimination. And something that I changed my opinion about throughout the years is that positive discrimination, at least in my opinion, is not the solution to the problem. So that's why we, for example, also don't necessarily stimulate our customers to do that anymore. I think something that you just mentioned, Sacha, is interesting. Like, for example, we try to stimulate companies to also focus more on competencies, etc., instead of just resumes. But there are still a lot of companies who, and I hope that meanwhile the connection will get back. There are still a lot of companies, and I see that as well in our customer base, that think that, for example, anonymizing a resume or positive discrimination or whatever is the trick to get more diverse people in the organization. Some people might agree, some might disagree. How do you balance your personal view on how to execute a DE&I strategy versus the client just wants something because they've agreed upon, for example, we always want at least 5 females in the pipeline for a specific role? Because you might not agree with that strategy. Did that ever happen in the past?
Yes, for me a lot. I think it's a matter of what your own values and vision are, and how well does that match with your client. And again, that sometimes takes balls and a bold move to say no. Like, what's the real reason behind you asking me to hire a female head of engineering? That's a role that we get quite often, a head of product, head of engineering, which are leadership roles within a tech company that is still predominantly male. And they don't want to have the whole leadership team male, or that the one excluded female is HR. So then the focus is really much on hire me a female head of engineering. But the reasoning behind it is a lot of times they can't give us the right argumentation. Besides that, either the board said like you need to become more diverse and this is the next hire on the list, so make sure that that's a woman. If they can execute and explain well what the strategy behind it is, so it's not a one box hire, but it's really a strategy, and we prefer this, but of course we're going to look for the person that fits best on all requirements. Then I think you have a very different conversation. So it's also about being curious as an agency recruiter and feeling more comfortable with asking those uncomfortable questions. That's something that I train a lot of recruiters in as well, because I know it's uncomfortable to ask, so what's the reason that you want to hire this and this person and this for a diversity hire? It should be like embedded in the strategy. But on the other hand, we always get very positive remarks because we're asking questions that normally nobody asks. And it's also mirroring of what do you want your perfect team to look like? What is a good representation of the world? Is that what you're aiming for? Then we need to aim for a representation in your talent funnel that we're going to introduce. And it's going to be a bit more time. So also explain like, hey, that female head of engineering, or you want to have more diversity in your leadership team. So we need to find more diverse candidates, which is more than just gender on male, female, or non-binary. Then instead of 2 weeks, maybe it's going to take us 4 weeks or 5 weeks to come up with a short list. Are you also willing to wait a little bit longer to get a more diverse talent pool? That's the kind of conversation agency recruiters are having, should be having more with their partners and their clients. Then slowly you will see that their mindset is going to change. And then, of course, you need to deliver on it as well.
Yeah. Hey, that brings me to, one of the last questions. I promised to everyone who already posted a question, we will get there, but it's linked to what you just said. Have any of you, the both of you, ever worked with a company where DE&I was clearly, or at least you had the feeling that it was more some sort of companies feeling the pressure from the outside to do something with that? And if that happens, what do you do with it then? Would you, for example, decide to then still work with that customer? Or what happens if you maybe find it out only after you started your assignment there?
I think right now there is. Can you hear me? I'm sorry because my connection is not perfect. Yeah, cool. Let's see if that works now. So I worked recently with a company that basically they just told me, hey, we need more gender diversity because my team is just guys, so we need a female person for this specific role, and that's okay, right? That's a good ambition, but then, like Sacha was saying, we need to ask questions to understand the real motivation behind it. And if the really motivation behind it is just because it doesn't look good on paper to have just guys on my team, that's not the right motivation to do that. And this will not only takes more time to find the right person because the motivation it's not there. Let me switch to another device.
No worries.
Really sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Sacha, did you ever experience this? Maybe after you started an assignment, because if it happens before you decide to collaborate, then you could always decide, of course, to not do it. But did it ever happen after you signed a contract?
Oh yes, yeah. I think it happens more often than we want to know and see. Honestly. You will find out sooner or later, right? And then I think it's a little bit of a combination between gut feel, learning what the leadership is like. So sometimes again being a bit brave in asking, like, can I meet people from the leadership team, not to question them, but to get to know them and get to know their reasoning, because it starts in the end. With leadership, right? If the leadership thinks this is a box we have to cross, but we don't feel we really need to change and want to change, the rest of the organization can push as hard as they want. and offer as diverse talent pool as they want, it's never going to fly. If they already get to the hire, then they still don't really practice inclusivity. And that means that your hire is going to be unhappy potentially and leave within a couple of months, which is even worse. And everybody who has an agency or works for an agency knows, like, once you make your hire, you want somebody to be successful and stay on board as long as possible.
Yeah.
So it happens quite often. It also happened a couple of times when we were already halfway and found out, okay, this is not the right motivation behind it. Starts with having really good conversations. Sometimes it ends with declining the assignments and saying, like, okay, if this is the motivation, we're not a good match for each other.
Yeah.
And a lot of as a starting agency, that's very scary, right? But on the other hand, what I said earlier, it's important to stick to your values and your own mission and vision. And if it's not aligned with a client, you're going to break up anyway. And then rather just break up when you're still in the dating phase than when you already get to that signing a contract and making the announcement of placing a candidate there. So yes, it happens. And then my advice is to listen to your gut feel and trust your values and act on that.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I see an interesting question from Kahina. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, and if not, then I'm sorry. Do you see similar changes in the perspective of candidates? Is DE&I getting more important? Oh, I see thumbs up. I think I pronounced it correctly. Thanks. Do you see that DE&I is becoming equally important for both candidates and your clients?
Yeah, I think so, especially on the candidate side. I think there is more candidates asking about the DE&I policy before even entering the process, especially for groups that are unrepresentative in the society. So I see a lot of that going on the candidate side, because for some people, they already suffer on their own skin the problems of working in a company that is not very diversity focused, and they felt left apart, and that's why they are changing. So there is more and more questions about what the company are doing before entering in. And I think that's fair, because if we want to change something, it's not only the companies that need to change, but also the people that come in, and they also need to make those questions, because this will help to help the companies to be more incisive and to look for more information and to have better policies in order to receive the right people in. So I see that's happening more and more, and I think, and I incentivize that to the candidates when I see that makes sense.
Do you see the same, Sacha? Also, maybe it's interesting. I read a report from Glassdoor and Indeed, I think last November, in which they asked a couple of thousand candidates whether DE&I is sort of a deciding factor for them. There were clear differences also on generational level.
Yep.
Do you see it as well?
Oh, yes. There's this really cool graph. I think I even shared it on my LinkedIn once, but it's an interesting one. And this data gets renewed every year, or probably every month, because the Generation Z that's now coming on the market, who are our interns or our starters at the moment, they value DE&I so highly compared to, for example, millennials, who are now in that phase of, okay, it's important, but it's not going to be my defining factor in choosing my next career move. If it's not really embedded in a company, which is in values, which is in a policy, which is in representation of the people actually work there, and displayed in the right way. So not in a pinkwashing way where you ask your one minority colleague to be on the picture of all employer branding campaigns, but it's really embedded and it goes beyond gender and race. So knowing that it's going beyond gender and race, and also explaining, like, hey, we're not there yet, but these are the action points that we're actually taking as a company to become more and more inclusive and diverse. That's what the newer generation is looking for. And I think it's even heavier on the candidate side than on the client side, because for the clients and the partners, it still feels a lot of times like, ooh, we see our competitors are doing it. Everybody's talking about it. We hear more and more quotations are coming on the market. So we have to move along with what the market is asking of us. The candidates really feel it. Like, I want to work somewhere where I can feel represented, and I see that there's enough representation in all layers of that company, so I can achieve whatever I want to achieve in my career. So I think on the candidate side, it's even heavier.
No. Hey, an interesting question that Aaltje is asking, in particular for the Dutch people or people in the Netherlands tuning in today. There is a new policy, of course, coming up where you have to prove that every candidate got the same opportunity to get hired for a job. I didn't know that it was in 2024 already, but Aaltje just mentioned it. What would be your advice to recruitment agencies in order to get ready for that? Because that's quite a heavy, that has quite an impact, of course, on your work.
Yeah, and I've been saying this already for a couple of years, that it's going to be a matter of time before the government is going to take actions. The same with the women's quota in advisory boards and commissionary boards. Everybody had a big opinion about it, or you loved it or you hated it, but you had an opinion about it in the Netherlands. And I already sort of suggested, or I think expected something similar to happen when it came to the bigger recruitment market. I think my best advice is really start prepping. You're already basically too late. Sorry, if it's going to really. I didn't know it was a done deal already, but 2024 is around the corner. We know how fast time goes. So start prepping, start educating, and start learning on what kind of impact is this going to have? What kind of things do we need to have in place to make sure that we can also apply to that matter, and not wait it out? Because I think in these kind of big changes in the market, it's better to be part of the early adopter phase than the later majority. Especially as an agency, you need to be able to make that difference. And you can make a difference by making sure on an educational level, you and your recruiters know what you're talking about.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree, but I think those type of changes are so hard to be practical. Like, I think also last year I heard there will be a law that will be mandatory to have the salaries on job descriptions. And if you see the job descriptions in Europe, like at least 70% of them don't have a salary range on it. And then when we see salary ranges, we see it from 100 to 500 or something like that. So a big range. And I think it's very hard to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity on the process, because not everyone is doing the same thing to apply for a company. So we also need to benefit the people that do more in order to enter in a recruitment process. So because those people are more motivated, they are more willing to change, they are more willing to enter in a certain type of company. So it's very hard to give exactly the same opportunity to everyone, right? So I think also when those laws are true and we need to comply with them, it's also very important to understand what that means in a practical way, because we all know that we are in a real world, in a recruitment world, where we need to hire someone next week. So how we will make sure that we provide the same opportunity to everyone, I think that's very hard to be true to every company and to every recruitment process. But we as an agency, we need to incentivize our clients to do that, because first of all, it's fair. Second of all, it's also a benefit for them to have a diverse candidate pool and a fair process to everyone. But it's very, very hard to really follow the lines from A to Z.
Yeah.
And something I think what is really needed in that sense is, because there are companies that are already ahead of the game and ahead of the curve, they should be displayed more in a sort of a role model position. So let's position the ones more that are doing a good job, because a lot of times the right ones are very humble. I ask all the time, like, oh my God, you guys are doing so many amazing things, good policy, good initiatives internally, and it's all just broadcasted on their intranet, or it stays within the walls of their office. And they don't want to pinkwash or be accused of pinkwashing or greenwashing. And that's why they say, no, because we don't want it to display as a marketing tool. And I think as agencies, we also have that power doing it for them, basically broadcasting the companies that really take a positive stand and be their marketing channel. So it's not them patting themselves on the back, but it's us really representing them as these are really inclusive companies. And that's also why, for example, we host an annual award show, because we know the right ones are very humble, and we believe they deserve a spotlight. And I think more companies can do that, especially us as agencies, is to, I don't know, give a diversity company shout out of the month or of the quarter or of even of the year, and explain with a couple of examples why you feel they're really doing a good job. I think that's something that they deserve, and they really would be very, very grateful for.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Just adding two points really quick about that. Sacha, I agree 100%. And I see a lot of companies being recognized to be a great place to work because they paid for a price that will give them a certificate. And then when companies are doing really good actions towards something different, they are not recognized by that because they don't have money, because they are investing sometimes that money internally to have more tools and a faster process, etc. So I think it's very smart that the companies are proud of what they are doing and they expose that to the outside. And I say that the same thing to Kenya. It's if you are proud of something that you did in your career, you should tell that on the interview. And the companies needs to do the same. If they are doing something really nice in their recruitment process, make sure that everyone knows it. Because if only your internal people know it, that won't make a difference and that won't make an impact.
Yep, I agree.
Fully agree. I see lots of examples of companies bragging about DE&I strategies that I think are not necessarily worth bragging about. And exactly like you mentioned, the other way around, companies doing amazing things and you will never find it anywhere. Hey, Orlando asked a question that is an interesting one, because Gonçalo, you just mentioned it as well, of course. I think that a big challenge in DE&I is how to make it practical also for people to act upon a strategy. I think I see it as well with our customers. A lot of people really want to make a change, but they simply don't know how to get started. The question Orlando is asking, what is more important, knowledge and tools or backup from the CEO to execute DE&I?
Backup from the management, because the tools you can buy. But if the management is not on board with the strategy, it's not helping towards that. You don't even need tools to begin with, in my opinion, if you want to change something about DE&I in your company. But you need the backup and the sponsorship of the management. But that's related with any change management process that you need to do in any company, right? You can have a lot of money, you can have the best tools, but if the management is not supporting that direction, nothing will happen. So yeah, that's an easy answer in my opinion.
I agree 200%, and it's bigger than the CEO. I think it's the whole, what you said, the whole leadership. And sometimes it starts with just dragging them along to an inspirational talk or an inspirational experience. Because again, it's a lot of times they don't know what to see if they don't know what's wrong. So you can't change what you don't know. And that's something I say way too often. But once you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, then you can start understanding, you have been mistreated or you have been excluded. I've never had that experience because let's face it, the traditional sort of C-level figure is still somebody of privilege or with a lot of privilege. So yeah, you can't explain privilege to somebody who has it. That makes it very difficult. You only can let them experience what it is to be none or less privileged by listening to somebody else's talk, or you have a lot of cool experiences like tooling, VR tooling nowadays, where people can literally experience how it is to be in a wheelchair or to be a trans person or, well, basically everything. So I think that us as HR and recruiters should challenge our management and leadership more on, why don't you join me? whenever you go next time to an event, or you know that there's a lot of really good things happening in the market. I speak at a lot of events. Majority of the people in my room, I don't have to convince. They are already, they're already on board of the DE&I train, and they're like, yes, we need this, but we need leadership to join. So I think it's a good challenge for next time when you're listening. Tag along your director or your CEO or your COO, or the one that you think is gonna drive that change, and ask them, like, I would love it if you can come with me and see and listen to what needs to happen. And that's the target audience we need more in these kind of webinars, but also in sessions.
Yeah, and maybe the hiring managers also. That's something, I don't know what your experience is, but my experience is that the recruitment team, the people team in general, usually they're 10 steps further. Most organizations, they do understand why this is important. Then usually I see that management comes a bit later, but the hiring managers, in my opinion, or in my experience so far, might be the most challenging group, actually. Is that, have you experienced that as well?
I think they are the hardest ones to make examples from it. So, because when they understand that their teams will work better, that they will have more productive, that they will have better results in the end, that's a way easier to convince them. So if we see people will only change for two big reasons, or they are in pain, or they want more pleasure. And for people that are in a privileged place, it's very hard for them to feel the pain. Because they are secure, they always had opportunities, they all work well on their work environment, so they cannot relate so well with the pain of other people that are being discriminated, for example. So my strategy, at least, is to focus more on the pleasure, in this case on the gains that person can have. So if you have a more diverse team, you'll have better results, the team will get along together, they can learn more with each other, and in the end of the day, you'll have better business results. But those business results won't happen from today to the next month. Maybe they will take 6 months. Maybe they will take 1 year. So if we can show that there is other teams in the company that have better results, the hiring manager will follow. So I think you just need to show a strong example saying this already work in our company in this team. Do you want to be behind, or do you want to be the best team in the company? And they will follow with that. So I think showing them examples, especially internal examples, starting with one team and then spread it out for other teams, is very critical.
Yeah, that's a smart one. Hey, my last question, because I promised to stick within 45 minutes now. I'm sorry. Maya is asking, and I hear this question a lot from companies. How can you source a more diverse talent pool? I think that's it's sort of a black box that everyone is now starting to wonder about.
I think it's what works for us is, one, we have a diverse team ourselves. So because with the diverse backgrounds come diverse knowledge, groups, platforms that you know about that your colleagues don't know about. So by sharing that knowledge and not all keep fishing in the same pond already works very well. And also emerging in very different talent pools by physically sometimes going there. So looking up like what is something that combines a certain community. If you would like to see more representation, for example, of the queer community, and you think my client, and you had the balls to ask them, do you have queer representation in your company, or do you have enough queer representation? I can almost guarantee you the answer will be probably no, or I don't know. Then it starts with, okay, would you like to know at least approximately? And also educating them on, so how big is that percentage in general, and do you think your company represents that right percentage? Because what a lot of people don't know, if we would talk about, for example, in the neurodiversity spectrum, that between 15 and 20% of all people fit in the neurodiversity spectrum. So asking them if they think the company has a honest representation, that would mean if they have 200 people, you can do the math. But a lot of times they don't know. And if you want to know where these people are, Google is your best friend. You can find platforms, communities, online. There's a lot of meetups happening where it's drawn to a different kind of community. Go there, right? Go to one of those meetups. Go to a queer gathering event and start mixing with other kind of communities to broaden your own community. That's, I think, is, for me, the low-hanging fruit of gathering and collaborate more with other kind of recruiters, because a candidate that didn't work out for you could be very interesting for another recruiter, and then the favor will be returned. So instead of keeping everything behind closed doors, start helping each other out more. That's, I think, how we can get to a more inclusive workforce.
Yeah, I fully agree. A last question, because I'm going over time now. So time management is not my strongest point. If you would have one last advice, something that we did not touch upon, because I think there were still lots of questions that we couldn't cover in these 45 minutes. One last piece of advice that you didn't give yet to everyone who's still listening.
I think following a little bit the last answer that Sacha did, try new stuff, talk with new people, be curious, ask hard questions. I think that's the drill, and the only way for us to change something, it's really do something that we are not comfortable with, and putting ourselves on the uncomfort zone that will help us to get different results. But if we do always the same thing, if we always look to the candidates in LinkedIn, if we don't go outside of it, we'll get the same results. So if you want different results in your organization, you need to start to do different stuff.
I love that. I think my favorite, one of my favorite quotes is, "Out of your comfort zone is where the magic happens." I think recruiters are recruiters also because they sort of like that playing in the uncomfortable fields. I think embrace that uncomfortableness more and just start asking questions, start dipping yourself into more knowledge, follow inspirational people. There's a list of, I even made a blog post about it, which are very inspirational people who post a lot about these topics. So even if you don't have the budget to get a training or to go to a keynote or something like that, there's so much information nowadays online. Follow the right people who speak about this and the right companies that speak about this, and ask questions. I'm always available if people want to know more or really have questions that they would like to ask in person. Please follow me or add me on LinkedIn and ask your question. I will always answer.
Thanks so much. And then my last one, it's a bit of a shameless promotion, but I think my colleague Kat posted it somewhere in the chat, but we do with Equalture have our first offline event coming up in Amsterdam, though, on the 11th of May, which is called the Breaking By Summit, and it's basically, it covers every relevant topic around DE&I, from neurodiversity to gender equality, how to source more diverse, how to select more objectively. So if you would like to drag someone to an event to create some awareness, then feel free to check it out. Having that said, so sorry, Sacha and Gonçalo, for going over time, but I think we could spend another hour at least on answering all of the questions. Easy. So we might reach out for a follow-up actually on this one. But thanks so much for joining this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And you already mentioned it, of course, Sacha, but for everyone who's listening, if you have any follow-up questions for Gonçalo or for Sacha, feel free to add them on LinkedIn, of course, and ask your follow-up questions. And I hope to see you soon on one of our next webinars. And big thanks again, guys, for being here today.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all. Bye-bye.